Hello, hello. Welcome to Whole Lotta Heart, where we talk about grief, healing, growing through the hard stuff, and learning to love ourselves through it all. I'm Kayla, your host, your hype girl, and your safe space. Whether you're deep in your feelings or just trying to keep it together, pull up a seat, child. This space was made for hearts like yours. So I want to have a real conversation today. One of those sit on the floor, blanket wrapped, just me and you kind of talks. And I'm currently wrapped up in my blanket on the couch, ready to chat. So I want to talk about the moment where you realize you're not okay. I know I've talked about it in the context of maybe you've had a bad day or something triggers for an emotional moment. And I've also talked about how it's okay to not be okay. But now I mean that you are deeply not okay. Like one day you're just moving through life, you're working, hanging out with friends, keeping busy, and then suddenly it hits you like a ton of bricks. And you're like, oh snap, hold up, I'm actually not okay. I haven't been for a while. Have you had that moment? Can you pinpoint when that was? I know that moment. I've lived that moment. And today I'm going to talk to you about what that moment looked like for me, the build up to it, what the actual breakdown was, and the courage it took to finally get some help and what I've learned through it all. And I think we live in a world where functioning is praised, and that's the expectation that you will function. Where if you're not falling apart in public, people assume you're doing great. If you're smiling, even better. If you're staying productive, you are winning, okay? But sometimes the smiles and the busy schedules that we have, behind all of that, there's exhaustion, there's sadness, there is something bubbling under the surface that we've been too scared or too numb to really look at and to address. So this episode is for anyone who's ever said, I'm fine, when they were anything but fine. And if you're listening right now thinking, this might be me, just know you're not alone. Let's get into it. So let's rewind. Before I had my I'm not okay aha moment, I was functioning. I was in high functioning, grief girly mode. I was getting things done. I was showing up to work, hanging out with my friends. I had just started a new job that required me to travel. I was doing all the things. And you would have looked at me and thought, she's handling it so well. In fact, I had a lot of people tell me that, like, you are really doing good navigating this after losing your mom, especially knowing how close I was to her. They were in awe of this. And honestly, I believed it too. I believed I was doing well for a while because I wasn't crying every day. I wasn't staying in bed all the time. I thought that because I wasn't, doing those things, that must mean I'm healing, right? But the truth is, I was just staying busy to avoid being still. I was numbing through distraction, through work, through running errands, appointments, anything to keep me from sitting with what I was actually feeling. I was doing that, okay? But the signs were all there. They were all there. I was tired. Like, I could sleep 8 or 9 hours, wake up and still feel like I could sleep 8 or 9 more hours. I felt like I was a little bit more snappy and attitude-ish with the people that I loved. Let's not even talk about the brain fog. I could forget what I was doing mid-sentence. I couldn't focus on anything for long periods of time. My stomach was on tilt all day, every day, because my anxiety was through the roof. But I kept going, because I thought I was doing okay, because I wasn't crying every day, because I wasn't sad. And even though I was having all those symptoms, I was still able to push through. And that became my measurement for what it meant to be okay. And that's not healthy. And in hindsight, I now know how unfair that was to myself. And I realized that just because I'm not crying doesn't mean that healing is taking place. what I realized was what was happening was suppression. I was suppressing everything that I was feeling so that way I can move on and have some type of sense of normalcy. So, what was my aha moment? What was the moment that literally cracked me open? I wish I could say that it was some beautiful, magical, movie like epiphany where the light bulb just went off and, my life changed immediately. But it wasn't. It was not like that. My life did change afterwards, but it wasn't as instant, it wasn't as magical, and it required a lot of work. But the moment was in December 2021. So this is what, 4 months after my mom had passed. And I remember being pretty anxious and unsettled all of December, maybe even back to Thanksgiving. I just think that I was anticipating the first Christmas without my mom, and I was going through a breakup as well. And, the breakup was mutual. We were still cool, still friends at the time, but we realized that we both just needed to work on ourselves. He definitely had personal things he needed to work on, and I did too. I think I knew that I was emotionally guarded and I was still wounded. I was still recovering from everything that had happened with my mom. And I knew that this wasn't the right time or the right relationship, really, for me to be in. And even though I knew these things, I wasn't aware, though, how much the breakup and how much losing my mom had impacted me. And it was affecting how I was functioning. And I didn't realize just how not okay I was. So after Christmas, maybe a day or two, my dad comes over to hang out with me. My dad, he comes over to hang out at least once a week, and I love it. So he was here, and we were just chilling and chit-chatting, and I was talking to him about my breakup, as this was really, my first real relationship. And I was crying a bit because, first real relationship, it's ending. It was emotional for me. Then we started talking about something about my mom, and I broke down. I remember I was sitting on the arm of my couch, and it was a casual conversation. It wasn't even anything crazy, but I began crying so hard. Like, I cried harder than I had in months. And these weren't just sad tears, they were everything tears. So frustration, guilt, fear, loneliness. It was like one of those full body cries where your full body is activated. Your breath sounds like you're taking big gulps. Like, this was a gut cry, I remember. And I remember telling my dad that I had been crying a lot more, which I had. I had been feeling more anxious throughout the month, and I told him verbatim that I was not okay and that I was really sad. And my dad, he came over and he hugged me and he comforted me and he said, "Biscuit." My dad calls me Biscuit. He said, "Biscuit, it's okay. You miss your mom. You're going through this breakup. All of your feelings are normal. But it may be helpful for you to talk to somebody. Someone that's not me or your sister, because you're not feeling like yourself right now." My dad was suggesting therapy to me, and this kind of hit home because my dad is very supportive of everything that I do, my sister, my nephew does, and we include him in everything. He plays an integral part in our lives every day. And, he also allows us to live our lives how we want, and he is very respectful of boundaries that we put in place as adults. And he also hasn't always been the biggest advocate for therapy. He wasn't against it, but he never openly advocated for it. So, given this context, the fact that he said this to me means that, he's really concerned, really. And I took what he said to heart and started to think about it. Like, okay, dad is suggesting this. He usually doesn't say much. Maybe I need to think about what my next steps are. And in that moment, even though I had literally just said the words to my dad that I was not okay, it hit me that I was not okay. And I literally felt like I was floating in that moment. And all I could think about was, why am I only realizing this now that I'm not okay? How did I let this get this far? And why did I not check in with myself sooner? And the truth is, I had been holding everything in for so long that I didn't even recognize that I was holding anything in anymore. And that's why I was only realizing this now. That's why I let this get this far. That's why I didn't check in with myself, because I wasn't recognizing this anymore. And it took having this conversation and this experience with my dad for this to click and to make any sense to me. And, that moment, that breakdown, it wasn't the end of the story. That's not where the grieving journey stops. I didn't automatically become okay. In fact, I would say that's the beginning. It was the beginning of my healing and the beginning of my grieving journey. Because after that conversation with my dad and what he said, the next day I woke up and I felt a little different. I remember I felt lighter, and I had decided to try to do something to get me back to myself, to get me back to feeling emotionally in control. So I decided to look into therapy. I was recommended a practice, so I did some research on them, and I decided to give them a call. The person I was recommended to see was not taking new patients at the time. However, there was another counselor available, so they asked if I wanted to be scheduled with them, and I decided to give them a shot. And, I had never done therapy of any kind before, so I didn't know what to expect. I was going into this with no expectations whatsoever, and I was fine with just going with the flow on this to see really what the benefits are, to see what I can get out of this. And if it doesn't work for me, it doesn't work for me, was my take on this. So my first appointment comes and I meet with Justin, and it's the first appointment, so we're chatting and just getting to know each other. And then he asked, why therapy now? And what are you looking to get out of our meetings? What are your expectations for this relationship? And when I tell you, I cried like a baby again, sitting on his little sofa, okay, just thinking about it and talking about it out loud to Justin, because finally saying, Justin, I'm not okay, after pretending for so long, felt like the biggest exhale after holding your breath for months. You know how, like, when you cook something in the pressure cooker, and when it's finally done, you release the pressure, you release the air, and the smoke comes out? That's how I felt. I literally felt like I had the smoke coming out of the top of my head. And it felt like I was choosing myself in a way that I hadn't before. Like, I felt like a little bit of a release, like a release of pressure, of nerves, But I'll be honest, I have always been a big advocate of therapy. I've seen what it has done for other people, but I was a smidgen nervous. I have to admit, I was worried about being seen as too dramatic, or I was worried about, if he would think I was doing too much. And I usually can manage my emotions. I can process things, and, I can get through things pretty quickly to move on. And I guess I felt kind of embarrassed that I couldn't just push through and move on anymore. But here's the truth that I landed on, though. Asking for help doesn't mean that I'm weak. It doesn't mean that I'm no longer capable of managing my emotions and processing things. That's not what that means. It just means that I'm human, and this is real, and this is necessary. And I have never had to navigate something so traumatic in my life, like losing a parent, losing my mom. So I had to keep reminding myself that. I had to keep reminding myself that it's okay that I approach the situation differently than I may have any other thing, because it affected me so much differently than any other thing I've ever experienced. And honestly, Seeking out therapy and really taking the time to establish this relationship with Justin and take heed to the lessons that he's teaching, this was like the kindest thing I've ever done for myself. And through this journey, I've learned a lot from my own realizations, and I've learned a lot through Justin. So I wanted to just share a few things with you that I wish someone would have told me sooner in my journey. The first being that healing doesn't always come in these grand moments. They can, but they don't always come that way. But that's usually how we expect them to come, to be quite honest. But sometimes healing shows up as like those tiny, brave decisions to just stop pretending that you're okay and to actually take care of yourself. And though these things may seem small, they matter more than we realize that they do. So, when you send the text when you need support from your village, when you cancel plans that you just don't have the capacity to go forward with, when you cry when you need to, when you rest without guilt, these little moments can sometimes lead to some of the biggest leaps in your healing and grieving journey. You don't have to be at your breaking point to get help. You don't have to hit rock bottom to deserve support. Your experience is just as meaningful and valuable regardless of how you choose to express those emotions. If you have a breaking point, I know I did, so be it. But if you don't, it doesn't mean that you aren't feeling things because you're managing them differently. You don't need a checklist of symptoms to justify your pain. In my opinion, in my mind, the checklist is just a way to explain your pain to make it understandable to other people. That's all it is. And sometimes we and others, we feel that if we don't have this checklist of symptoms, then is it even happening? Yes, it is. Not everyone experiences and shows pain in the same way. So don't feel like your pain is any less valid because you don't have the symptoms. Maybe you sleep just fine. You're not having the anxiety. That's okay. You don't have to have the symptoms that people can see and connect with for your pain to be valid. You can be smiling and still be struggling. Grief doesn't always look like tears. It can look like silence. It can look like busyness. It can look like detachment. Remember, though, that just because you're not crying does not mean you're healing. But also on the flip side, joy and grief can sit at the same table. Just because you're grieving and figuring out your new life does not mean you won't have happy moments in the middle of this. You deserve happy moments. You deserve to have joy and to have fun and to appreciate all the good things while they're here. But you just have to be mindful not to allow the happy moments to cloud your feelings and to give you a false sense of healing, especially if you are in a place where you're not fully okay. And if you're wondering if you are okay, maybe you're questioning it, that could be a sign to you that you're not okay. And that is totally fine. If you're unsure whether you're okay right now, here are a few signs that I had and ignored that maybe you shouldn't. Okay? Do as I do, not as I say, right? Oh, I'm sorry. Do as I do, not as I say. Yeah, that's right. Or wait, hold on. Do as I say, not as I do. Okay? Don't ignore them like I did. Follow them like I'm telling you to. So if you're tired, no matter how much you sleep, there's probably something underlying there. It could be. If you're more irritable, more annoyed with your people, more snappy, that could be a sign of just not being okay, having some type of emotional thing you need to work out. If you're feeling disconnected from yourself or your friends, that could be a sign that you're not okay, especially if you are a social butterfly and you love to be with people, you love to hang out with your family and your friends. Or if you feel like you're not yourself, like you can't connect with yourself and you're just feeling like out of body, that could be a sign that something else is underlying there. You're constantly overbooking yourself. You're trying to keep busy so you can avoid dealing with your feelings. You're trying to keep yourself busy so you can avoid the silence, because oftentimes in that silence is where thoughts happen. That's where memories happen. That's where feelings erupt. So you're doing things to distract you, to, keep busy, And then you feel numb more often than you don't. So you're not experiencing anything happy. You're not experiencing anything sad. You're just feeling like meh all the time. That's not a good place to be. That's not healthy. That's not where we want you to be when there's so many good emotions for you to feel. And there's so many good things that can happen to you that we want you to experience and feel the joy of. But if something is underlying and you're not dealing with the feelings that are causing that, then it results in you feeling numb. If any of those hit you, I feel you. You're not alone in this. Your I'm not okay moment doesn't have to be a breakdown. Let's start with this. It can be a result of finally checking in with yourself, which I encourage. In having my aha moment and obviously working through therapy, I realize the value of checking in with myself to make sure that I don't find myself back in that place of feeling just out of control emotionally again. And it's so helpful, really, just to check the pulse on myself sometimes. It helps me to see growth. It helps me to see where I want to grow more, what I need help with, and what I can bring to Justin to help me address. And I know it's tough because in doing that check-in, you may find that you still have a lot of work to do and, you still need to make some progress, but you can't help yourself if you don't even have a clue, right, where you are in your journey. So reflection should be an integral part of your self-care. So here we are, heart to heart. But if you're listening to this and realizing maybe you're not okay right now, please hear me when I say this. You're still worthy. You're still lovable. You're not broken. You're human. And struggling doesn't make you a failure. It makes you honest. And honest is where that healing can really begin and start to take shape. And if this episode made you feel seen, even just a little bit, I'd love for you to share it with a friend who might need the same reminder. You never know who's quietly struggling behind a smile. And if you haven't already, go ahead and follow or subscribe to Whole Lotta Heart so you never miss an episode. I'm really trying to build a space where it's safe to just talk about all the things, and I'd love for you to be a part of it. You can also come hang out with me too on Instagram at Whole Lotta Heart Podcast. Slide into my DMs. I seriously would love to hear from you. So be gentle with yourself this week, and remember, you're allowed to fall apart. You're allowed to be real, and just know that I'm so proud of you for being here. And with my Whole Lotta Heart, I'll talk to you soon.